I grew up on a pumpkin farm in a quiet rural town, the kind of place where the wind rustles the cornfields and the silence of the night feels like a living thing. My parents ran the farm, an expansive piece of land that stretched out across flat plains and rolled gently towards the woods. It had rows of pumpkins, from small, round ones to huge, knotted gourds that could barely fit in a wheelbarrow. Each year, people from all around the county would come to pick their pumpkins for Halloween. And each year, it seemed, the farm became more popular. But there was one thing about our farm that always unsettled me: the scarecrow. It had been there for as long as I could remember, buried deep within the pumpkin patch, so tangled in vines and weeds that if you didn't know it was there, you'd easily miss it. Its face, if you could call it that, was a burlap sack stuffed with straw, sewn crudely with mismatched stitches. Its eyes were black pits, buttons that had faded into something more sinister over the years. And its smile, gosh, the smile, was a crooked line that curved too far up its face, making it look like it knew something horrible that you didn't. The way the vines curled around its wooden arms made it look more alive than any scarecrow had the right to be. I always got the impression that it was watching, even though I told myself that was ridiculous. It was hidden so well behind the thick foliage that you really had to search to find it. But I could always feel it, like it was waiting for something, or maybe just watching me. It had always been part of the farm's eerie charm. Every Halloween season, visitors would wander through the rows of pumpkins, laughing and pointing at the odd shapes, unaware of the thing lurking in the shadows. My parents would smile and sell pumpkins by the pound, while I roamed around, making sure kids didn't run off with anything. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of the scarecrow as I passed, just the top of its head poking out from the vines. Each time, a shiver would crawl up my spine, but I never let on. After all, it was just a scarecrow, wasn't it? On a particular fall afternoon, the sun was low in the sky, casting a deep orange hue over the fields, making everything look dreamlike. The farm was busy, with families meandering through the pumpkin patch, picking their favorite gourds to carve into jack-o'-lanterns. My parents were at the stand, chatting with customers, while I wandered the rows, keeping an eye out for anyone who might need help, or worse, someone looking to steal a pumpkin. That's when I saw her, a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, wandering away from her parents, her eyes wide with curiosity. She was slowly making her way toward the scarecrow, her small hands brushing the tall grass as she walked. I froze when I saw her heading in that direction. Something inside me tensed, like a tight knot twisting in my gut. The scarecrow. I didn't know why, but the thought of anyone getting too close to it made my skin crawl. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. The girl stopped in her tracks and looked at me, confused. "Don't touch that. It's fragile." That was a lie. The scarecrow wasn't fragile. Not even close. In fact, I had no idea what it was made of under those vines, but it looked like it had been standing there for decades. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad would happen if she got too close. She tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "Why?" It's old. You might break it," I said, my words stumbling out. The girl stared at me for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away, her attention quickly shifting to another pumpkin. I breathed a sigh of relief, though I wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't like the scarecrow could hurt her, could it? Not long after, the wind began to pick up. At first, it was a gentle breeze, rustling the leaves and making the vines sway. But then, without warning, it intensified, howling through the pumpkin patch like a wild animal. The front door of the house slammed open, even though I could have sworn we had locked it. I rushed toward the porch to close it, fighting against the wind, confused as to how such a strong gust could come out of nowhere. As soon as I managed to pull the door shut, I heard a scream. It wasn't a playful, excited scream, like the ones you often heard from kids running through the fields. No, this was different. It was filled with terror. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. A woman was standing at the edge of the pumpkin patch, her face pale, her hands clutching at her mouth in horror. "My daughter! Someone took my daughter!" Panic surged through me, my stomach lurching as I tried to comprehend what she was saying. The girl, the same girl who had wandered toward the scarecrow, was gone. Without thinking, I glanced over toward the scarecrow's spot, my breath catching in my throat. It was gone. The vines that had wrapped around its body were torn apart, like something had ripped free of them. The patch where it had stood was empty, the ground disturbed, and the burlap face, the twisted, stitched face, was nowhere to be seen. The woman's voice trembled as she pointed toward the cornfield that stretched out beyond the pumpkin patch. "It took her into the corn. I saw it. A dark figure. Oh gosh, please, someone help." I didn't think. I just ran. The cornfield was dense, taller than I remembered, and as I plunged into it, the wind seemed to vanish, leaving only an eerie, oppressive silence. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pushed through the stalks, my hands trembling with each step. The further I went, the darker it became, the tall cornstalks blocking out the fading light. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me, and every time I paused, I could hear the faintest rustling sound, like something was moving just out of sight. I called out the girl's name, my voice cracking with fear, but the only response was the sound of shuffling leaves and the occasional gust of wind that seemed to come from nowhere. I felt like I was walking in circles, the rows of corn all blending together in a disorienting maze. My mind raced with thoughts of what could have taken her, who, or worse, what? Then, just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I heard it. Laughter. I stopped dead in my tracks, the sound sending a chill down my spine. It wasn't a sinister laugh. It was the light, playful giggle of a child. I followed the sounds, pushing through the thick stalks until I found her. The little girl was sitting in a small clearing, surrounded by cornstalks, her back to me. She was laughing softly, her shoulders shaking with amusement. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold sense of dread. "Hey," I called out, my voice hoarse. "Are you okay?" She turned slowly to face me, her eyes wide and innocent, a bright smile on her face. "I made a new friend," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, as though nothing was wrong. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Who took you? Where's the figure?" She blinked at me, confused. "Nobody took me. I just wanted to explore." My mind was racing. The woman had seen something. She had screamed, panicked, saying a dark figure had snatched her daughter. But now the girl was sitting here, calm, as if nothing had happened, as if everything had been a lie. But it wasn't. I knew what I saw. Something wasn't right. I hurried the girl back to her mother, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. The woman hugged her daughter, tears in her eyes, asking over and over what had happened. But the girl just kept saying she'd been playing, that she hadn't been taken. As my parents arrived to take over, I turned back toward the scarecrow's spot. My breath caught in my throat. It was back. The scarecrow stood there, as though it had never moved, its wooden arms stretched out awkwardly, its head tilted slightly to the side. The vines were still wrapped around its legs, though they seemed more disturbed than before, as if something had struggled free of them. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. Had it moved? Could it have moved? Or was I just imagining things? I took a hesitant step forward, then another. I needed to know. I needed to be sure. When I reached the scarecrow, I stood there, staring up at its face. The crooked smile seemed even more twisted now, more knowing. I felt a cold sweat drip down my back as I leaned in closer, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. For a moment, everything was still. The wind had stopped. The sounds of the farm faded into the background. It was just me and the scarecrow, locked in some silent, terrible standoff. And then it happened. One of its arms twitched. I stumbled back, my heart leaping into my throat. I hadn't imagined it. The scarecrow had moved. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. Hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you in the next one. See you on the flip side.